Good evening. Let's call the special meeting of the City Council of the City of Marysville to order today at 5:30. Roll call, please.
Mr. Simmons?
Here.
Mr. Buttercaboli? Here. Ms. McKenzie? Here. Mr. Hudson?
Here.
Mr. Samayoa?
Here. This is a special meeting that we'll do before our regular meeting, and we're going to be discussing a follow-up of our workshop we held on March 4th, updating our goal-setting session. And this comes from Marty Brown. Ms. Brown?
So good evening, Mayor, Vice Mayor, and council members and members of the public. The item here before us is to revisit the items from the goal-setting workshop, in particular the projects and prioritization of those projects, as well as vision statement and goals that were in last year's budget that we started to look at during the goal setting on March 4th. So Katie Burdick with Burdick and Company is back here again to help facilitate and tie up a few loose ends, if you will, from that meeting on March 4th. So with that, Katie, you want to take it away?
Good evening, everybody. Good evening, everybody. This is always awkward for me. I hate turning my back on people. It feels dismissive, but it isn't. So we'll go with however this plays out. Okay, so since the workshop in February, right, or the very beginning of March, I actually have taken a vacation. So I'm all refurbished and ready to roll. I will say, though, that it didn't help my voice one bit. So don't be shy about asking me to speak up. So we have an agenda in front of us. No sooner did I design the agenda than I rethought the agenda. So I have a suggestion to put before you. So currently the agenda goes, look at the vision, do a quick review, look at the goals, do a review of the suggestions from the meeting when we were together last, look at developing criteria for project ranking, look at the protocol and sort of process for pursuing funding for these projects, and then just make sure we've got a list of action items. In thinking this through, it occurred to me in some ways that the most critical piece of this agenda actually is the criteria for ranking projects, because there's opportunities coming up both from Yuba Water Agency, from multiple state agencies, from federal agencies, and it feels to me like the pressure point really is in figuring out how to prioritize projects. So wondering how you would think about flipping the agenda and spending the bulk of our conversational time around really getting down into the weeds with the criteria for ranking projects, and then I'll save time at the end for us to go through the vision and go through the goals. But perhaps spend the first 20 minutes to a half hour digging into the criteria by which projects will be selected. So what do you think?
I think that's great. Let's do that, and let's spend 20 minutes on it.
Okay. So I turned off my phone. The clock is in my peripheral vision, so I'm counting on somebody to go like this. Okay, Marty. So warn me at 10 minutes in. Okay, so you will want to flip in your packet, which for those of you back there, there's a packet here, and we're flipping to the page that looks like this, which is a table. And I had numbered the pages, but the page numbers have disappeared. So here's what I would like to tell you about this table. So what we did is we took all of the projects that all of the city council put up on the flip sheet with me, and all of the projects that city staff put up on the flip sheet with Emily. Then she and I went through and made an integrated list where in every case where we felt, decipher the primary subject matter of either the sticky tag or the handwriting on the chart. We grouped them by topic, and then for ones that we weren't sure, which are all the way at the end, with no judgment implied, we called them miscellaneous, meaning we weren't sure exactly what category to put them in. So once we got the list, then I had conversations with Emily, with several folks that I work with that are fundraisers, who spend their days thinking about how to pitch and spin and describe a project to give it a high probability of being funded. I spoke with Marty. So between all of these sources, I present to you this evening a set of criteria that are in boldface across the top of each column. So this is a starting place for us. I would be thrilled if we have perfect consensus by the time we're done. And believe me, I structured it with that intent, but we all know where wordsmithing is at. So the first set of criteria, is it a one-time expense? Is it an ongoing expense? That helps give you sort of a way of thinking it through. Is it mandated or required? So is it something that you have to do, whether you want to or not? Does it generate revenue or not? Does it improve the city's best management practices, BMP? Does it create cost savings? So that set of criteria to me was performance-based. You know, will these projects address these issues? The second set of criteria looks at possibility for funding. Is this something that there's a known funding source for? Is this something that there's a non-city funding source for? Is there some ability to predict the possible likelihood of funding, and what is the funding source? So that's enough of me reading you something that's in front of you. So what my query for all of you would be is, I purposely didn't put budget, and I purposely didn't put my sense of funding source. It seems important to me for you to all think this through, totally independent of whether you think you know a funding source or not, and how much you think the project will impact the budget or the fundraising effort. So these criteria should stand alone. So what do you think?
My initial question is, shouldn't they somehow tie to our goals and objectives towards meeting them?
And what I would say is, we did a pre-analysis, and these that are here should connect with our interpretation of the goals. So there was an interpretive process, but we did think about it. So
But maybe just to make it clearer,
so
maybe add a column or
yes.
something in there that
Yeah.
adds which goals is it tied to.
Yep. Okay.
And if it's multiple goals, then that's great.
Yeah, so we could list them by number, just for brevity? Yes, okay.
Because then you can tie them directly to the budget and directly to the specific goal.
Good. Good suggestion. Other happinesses, dishappinesses?
What is the BMP? Can you say that again?
So BMP stands for Best Management Practices. So it's a way of double checking that you're meeting your own goals that you've set for yourself in terms of what are your best management practices.
I don't see One of the things that maybe we have to have a discussion somehow. There was a comment here going back, I'm going back and forth on the goals and objectives and then this
Okay.
list and the public safety. And one of the comments was that it's kind of hard to figure out how to measure that. Maybe we have to readjust that particular objective of reducing crime, but none of the tasks are tied to that, or are these kind of short-term tasks that none of the projects, there's nothing that kind of will help that goal progress.
You're talking about the public safety?
Correct.
Okay, so I think these criteria would address public safety in terms of, is it a one-time expense, or is it an ongoing expense? So,
But I don't see any of the projects that tie to public safety.
listed as a project.
Uh-huh.
Okay, so the under the fire department,
Yeah.
which is on the very last page, the fire department, definitely with the fire truck, the EMT, staff, a joint public safety center, and a needs assessment.
I guess, and then
But
going back
it's
to the
true
goals,
that-
there's nothing in the goals that tie to fire and public safety, so maybe public safety has to include something related to fire. I guess I'm trying to tie them all together here.
Which is, and so you're hopscotching in the same way that we did.
Yeah.
So if you look at the sheet that talks about public safety, addressing the issues of how to quantify, that show up as a discussion point.
Say that again, I'm sorry.
The methods by which you quantify public safety-related issues and the difficulty of that shows up as a discussion item under goals.
Mr. Chairman?
Hold on, I'll give you the floor, just give me a second. I guess what I'm trying to make it easy for all of us, and me, maybe just for me, I'll speak for myself,
That's good.
is I'm trying to make the connection that if we're gonna work towards these goals in the next 5 years, there should be tasks associated with each of these goals, in my mind, to move
Okay.
forward, to move them forward, or to put some energy behind them so that we can achieve them. Because reducing overall crime by 5 to 10%, that's a great find, but again, maybe that's too broad, maybe we need to be
Yeah.
more specific. But what tasks, what projects are we doing that would generate that movement, or just having cops on their own makes that happen magically?
Okay, so the way the verbiage I would use back, which fits with the way my mind works, is you're looking for implementation actions.
Is that what these tasks are, projects are?
Some of them absolutely are, but they aren't fully inclusive of all the issues that have been raised. So I would say a next step when we look at the goals would be adding, potentially based on your feedback tonight, we have, what is the goal? How do we rework it? Would be to add a column to say what are the implementation actions / tasks that would help us meet those goals. Some of them are going to be projects in the way that we thought of projects in March. Some of them will be actions that aren't strictly speaking projects.
I guess for me, aside from anything that's mandated or required by the state or the federal or some other entity, should fit to move us forward in meeting the goals that we've stated here. Otherwise, we'll never move forward or make a dent.
Okay.
And like, if that should be a priority criteria.
And so consistency with the goals is one that you're suggesting. Second one that it sounds like you're suggesting is once they're identified, does the project meet the implementation actions or tasks that were identified? Is that accurate? Okay. Well, and sometimes people have to see this again to, Bill?
I was just going to bring the point, goal 5 in our goals is public safety, reduce overall crime by 5 to 10%. That may be a goal that's reachable, but I think they should have 1 or 2 goals for that public safety. And also, if that was the case, if we as a council submit to the consideration that Public Works is a public safety unit, then that should probably be in there also in that goal 5.
And so my pushback, if it is pushback on that, would be a goal is a big picture statement. Typically, the way the hierarchy of these things is there would be a goal, then there would be a set of objectives, and the objectives give you the measurable steps by which you are sure that you're moving towards your goal. So some of what I think I hear both of you saying are what in my verbiage would be objectives. So what is the measurable thing that you're shooting for that will enable you to measure whether you're meeting the goal or not? And I think that's partially what I'm hearing you saying as well as you.
I totally agree with the mayor as far as aligning the goals with what we're talking about in this survey, if you will, or analysis. But I do think that when we start talking about public safety, it has to be mutually inclusive, not just singular to fire department or police department. Not that we don't respect them, but we respect our public works people too. So I want to make sure that goal 5 specifically states that, because if it doesn't, majority of the people say public safety, that's police officers and fire department. And they leave out one vital ingredient, so.
So would you,
I
pardon
think
me,
the area where it ties is code enforcement, Councilmember. I can see how making sure that our code enforcement on the streets are maintained, a certain standard, and that, I think
Yeah.
I think that's.
Mutually inclusive.
Yeah.
so jumping back to goals then, if for goal number 5, what I'm hearing is that public safety would have like an I period, E period for this is what we mean. Police, fire, public works / code enforcement is what you're meaning when you talk about public safety. Then the objectives would relate to what Chris and Ron actually can come back to you with, which would be reasonable objectives for you to evaluate whether you're moving towards the goal. Does that make
Yeah.
sense? So what I would add to the table then, the criteria table is which goals does it meet by number? And the next column would be which objectives does it meet by number? So, for instance, goal 1 would probably have 2 to 4 or 5 objectives, 1.1, 1.2, 1.3.
Well, there you go.
Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay. So other reactions? Thank you. So we've got 15 minutes.
I think,
Oh, it's been 15, so we have 15 more, or 10.
I think a lot of effort went into creating those documents. And I think there's a tremendous amount of information here that we can use and use it for scheduling against our goals. But we have to kind of filter out what's valid and what's not, and I would think, some of these were during the moment of what was happening during the seminar. But, for an example, stormwater plan, that's something you don't accomplish in just 6-7 months, as we
Right.
well know. Fire hydrant coating. Anyway, some of these things I think that we need to probably screen out and condense this down to where it's a workable document.
Well, and so my response to that would be to perhaps add a column that gives a time frame for implementation.
Good.
So rather than take a project off because you think it might take 10 years,
Yeah.
instead put a time frame for implementation, which then would enable you to look at phasing and breaking projects into component pieces that are sequential. So what do you think about adding a
I think it's
implementation
I think it's
timeline?
More information on it, easier for me to read it.
Okay. Other thoughts?
I got a lot of thoughts, but I want to give other folks a chance here.
Okay, Stephanie, Brad, anything that,
I like it. I think it's a good visual, and I agree with adding the goals and objectives piece, and then the time frame too. Because I think these are all things we mentioned, but they may fall, to the wayside for 5 years, you know, if it's not a priority. And so this is how we rank it, by going through the process of marking, checking the boxes. So I like it. I think it'll be really helpful when we all sit down to actually start checking.
Figure it out.
Yeah, it's good. Thank you.
Yeah.
I like it.
No, I'd agree with that. I mean, it is nice to see everything we discussed on that particular day in line items, but trying to figure out the priority is just going to be the challenge.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, there's only so much in the pot, and you got to figure out where it goes from there. So I would like to study it more.
Okay. And we can talk about the process by which we take this on
Yeah.
once we're good with using it for the process. So, Bruce, anything from you on this?
Not too much other than, isn't the priorities going to be somewhat set by the availability of funding?
Well, there are some people who would say you should never set your priorities by availability of funding because you'll have mission creep and always pursue the low-hanging fruit at the expense of the more complex and harder to fund. That said, it would be foolish to avoid going after the low-hanging fruit if you can. So I think the funding source piece is, first you establish, is this a critical project?
Right.
And that helps you make the decision, is it worth spending staff and council time and consulting time to pursue a non-critical project just because you think you could get it funded?
No.
And so that's the dilemma.
No, I understand what you're saying, but a critical project, we're not going to be able to move on it without the funding available for it. So what I was thinking is that the timeframes of the funding, especially if it's grants,
Okay,
is, I'm just thinking that would somewhat
okay.
prioritize based on when you have the funding to be able to move forward.
So if we add a column on the funding side, probably somewhere around the likelihood would be timing. Because absolutely, there's some grants I'm working on now that if we don't get them in by April 30th, it's gone.
Right.
So, yeah, okay. So if we add that as a criteria,
I think that would be great.
okay.
And I also do agree with Bill on making sure that we've got fire, police, and public works
Okay,
within the public safety.
and I think the reason why police isn't a specific line item is the discussion that we had that day sounded like it sort of wrapped around this idea of the 5% decline, and the mechanics of that and the meaning of that and the utility of that, rather than, in addition, adding on priorities. So I can get back with you, Chris, and also with Public Works,
Because,
to make sure that those are accurately reflected.
getting rid of blight is important. I know that's not listed, but I mean, that's what code enforcement is getting rid of that blight, unnecessary, and fire department also, you know, with weed abatement. All those things are important just for the look and the feel of the city, as people just enjoy maybe a nice walk around their neighborhood.
Okay. So for now, I'm going to put that under miscellaneous, but it's conceivable to me that it would as easily fit under land use, depending on how you slice it, so.
But I guess if our similar objective, maybe we need to rewrite, reduce overall crime by 5 to 10%. It could add, I mean, removing blight could help reduce crime.
Okay.
But anyway,
Okay,
but there's.
so let me add it as a concept, and then
Yeah.
we'll figure out what it means as we grapple with projects.
The one thing that is not here, and I think there's public interest in finding a way, and I know we have a new staff that weren't part of the whole bounce back initiative, but there was a lot of good work there. There was a lot of placemaking, there was some monies allocated to kind of integrate there's some good things that could be integrated in here fairly easy,
Okay.
or even the language that they use. We know we're gonna work at the hospital and make that a specific plan for the hospital area. But there was some language already in the bounce back. It's not brand new. B Street property, the lake, that whole area had a whole set of pretty good language and some projects in there as well. So we wanna make sure that we don't lose that, because
Yeah.
that was really good work with a lot of input from the public. I believe, Councilman Buttercoboli was part of that group, right? And I know there's a lot of effort done to kind of generate some language and creating new places and districts and D Street. So there's a lot of good stuff in there that I don't want to lose.
Okay, so what I will say is I'll put a note to myself to go back through Bounce Back, because it's probably been 5 or 6 months since I've really looked at it, and harvest
Because
ideas
I think a lot of
and
these
add 'em.
items are similar there, but,
Yeah,
so let's not
Okay.
lose some of that good work.
agree. Okay.
Mr. Mayor.
Yes, sir.
On your priority spreadsheet, are these in any way, shape, or form what you're listing as priorities? Or are these all just random at this point? And the reason I ask
Okay.
is because on the miscellaneous, you have hire grant program manager at the bottom. Is that the bottom, or is that just the miscellaneous items listed?
No, it's totally random.
Totally
It's the
random.
order they came in across me using all the different pieces.
Okay.
There's no implied
Okay.
priority in
Is it-
anything.
It seems that would need to be somewhat.
Yeah, I mean,
Or-
it's at
or
the
is
end
it a
because it was at
priority?
the bottom of the piece of paper that I'd scribbled on, and so it ended up last purely for that reason. And in fact, once we get done with prioritizing, we'll do away with the wastewater, water, and have one list that's one to whatever, and then another list that's prioritized water, one to whatever.
Oh.
Because you want to rank them both within their category, because some funding sources are very category specific. So you don't want to go to a funder and say, oh, well, this is actually priority number 82. You want to be able to go and say, this is our second highest priority with water. So you want to be able to frame that either way. So we would do both.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Would it be possible, Katie, when this thing gets evolved to where it's going to be, to put this on a disc? Will we be requiring to have input on this, written or checks or whatever?
Well, that's part of the discussion of where do we go from here. So is this a staff-driven exercise where staff does the prioritization and then the council reviews it? Is it, I mean, I think that it needs to be jointly developed, but whether it's jointly developed in a workshop or a meeting as opposed to jointly developed by staff and consultants taking a run at it, and then the council, pushing back on it, I mean, that's part of the process.
That's why I thought if this was on a disc or something that we had in our computers, we could respond back and forth. What do you think of this? What do you think of that?
Sure, I can give it to you in a multitude of formats that would enable you to
Something that's
engage.
easy. Just plug in your computer, you can see it.
Yeah, I can give it to you a disk, I can give it to you on a jump drive that sticks into the USB
That's
port.
fine. Whatever's easiest for you, Katie.
Okay, well, it's whatever's easiest for you, because you're the consumer, right? So I'll give it to you as hard copy, as a CD, as a jump drive, and send it to you as an attachment to an email.
Put it
That
in the
way.
cloud.
Put it on the cloud,
I'd better be better than that.
yeah.
I guess that is what is the next step. In my mind, we really need to get back in the room as we did. I think one annual is too long. I want to ask staff to maybe look at doing it, every 6 months and continue working on this, because we want to be able to provide input, but I think now that you have some thought about criteria for evaluating the projects and put them in some type of order, hopefully the next step will be that we'll take a look at something with this input, and then we'll be able to kind of work through it. In my mind, the budget also needs to reflect some of these
Yeah.
discussions as well.
Which makes it, that puts a short-term pressure
Right.
on figuring some of this out. So before we transition to talking about sort of the vision and goals where we've woven a little bit, a way to take this the next step would be for me to work with Marty. I'll revise this, that's easy. Then we could do a preliminary ranking. I think we're going to want probably to talk about weighting some criteria heavier than others, and we could bring a proposal back to you about that as well, and give you a chance to review it, and also give us a chance to do a preliminary rank so that you see what happens when you put these projects through this process, and then come back to you. The budget process doesn't give us a ton of time, right? So when is the next budget due? Tomorrow?
Almost. We're shooting for our first budget workshop with the council, the May 21st meeting.
Okay.
And it'll probably be on the agenda for the following 2 meetings in June.
Okay. So maybe Marty, whoops, you and I can see what we can do about bringing this back in a functional way as opposed to a conceptual way. And then, best scenario, it fits right in with the work that you're going to do. You're able to use it somewhat readily for this budget. Worst case is it needs enough work that at least a train of thought and discussion that it puts you into influences the budget. So we'll just see what we can come up with.
One more question.
Yes.
Is this going to be a second party to this? Because I think we had something where the grants would be available. Or, remember that big packet you were going to...
Yeah, and so here's my personal preference, and it's what I call compassionate manipulation. Those of you who are looking for a particular project will look only for the funding source that's associated with that project. So rather than have eyes go to a particular vehicle and say we're getting in that vehicle and we're driving, I would rather have criteria first and then funding availability. So that said, Marty's already had a preliminary discussion, which we'll get to in a bit, with the Yuba Water Agency and gotten some preliminary feedback on them. I can come back to you, as part of the budget process with our evaluation of these projects against known funding sources whose timeline fits next year.
That's what I was thinking.
Yeah.
Mr. Mayor? So, but when you come back, when we're talking about what we can work with the budget, we're going to have to be looking at anything that's on a time constraint first.
Yes.
Correct?
Well, that's up to you as a policy matter, but if you have something that's going to put you in non-compliance with some sort of regulatory
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about.
requirement, clearly that would be a high priority. And I'm sure there's other things that may be similarly high priority. But actually, just to make it clear, I don't have a priority. So these projects are all the same to me, which is why I can come in. It's the criteria that are important to me in terms of what you develop, even more than whether you use these. They have to fit for you.
Well, the priority also, though, I know you're saying you're not seeing any priority, but some of them are going to have to be in a stair step, though, to get
Yep.
from one to the next.
And that would be applying this criteria. Would sift so that you get number 1 overall, number 1 water, number 2 overall, number 1 wastewater, number 3 overall, number 1 public safety. I think you can do those at the same time. But we'll see, eh? So with that, jumping then to vision and goals. The vision, just so those of you who took the time at the meeting that we had, 3 people took the time to bring their recommendations for a vision statement up during or after, and so we have them still. And we also have Emily's notes, which is, this is a tiny version of the big spreadsheet that she did. And working with Emily, as well as another associate of mine who spends a lot of time doing strategic planning, so is engaged in the language of vision way more than I am. This vision that we came up with, we being the folks that I work with, I sent to Marty. Marty went through it, wordsmithed it from her perspective, and now it's in front of you. So it is the second page of your packet. And what we tried to do was respect what we perceived as the intent as well as the content of the original vision, and then took the notes that came out of Emily's dialogue with all of you and reworded it as shown. So the question is, like it, hate it, wordsmith it, where are you at?
Thoughts?
I don't remember what I wrote.
So you'll have to self-identify which one's yours.
Okay, thank you. Don't stare at me, just keep talking, it's all good.
We're waiting on you.
Thoughts, anyone?
Are we supposed to, I guess not supposed to.
Are we choosing? Are you
Yeah,
asking us?
that's
to
No,
choose?
it's not a choice. What I'm asking for is feedback and input so that I can bring back to you what in essence would be a working vision statement for this year's budget. So I suppose I could ask it that way. Is this appropriate? Can you live with this as the vision statement for the next budget? If not, why not?
I guess the one and the other one, when you start with to transform, I don't know if that's a vision more than a mission statement to do something.
Mm-hmm.
And this, the first one, Marysville Envisions, then that's kind of, you know, it says what it is. It's a vision statement of what you, so that's, I guess that's my only input on this. The first one, it starts with the to, you know, that's kind of an action to do kind of statement, objective, but the Marysville Envisions, and that's mine.
So what do you feel about, what do all of you think about sort of what I affectionately call the blah blah?
Yeah.
The
blah blah?
substance of the vision, you know,
Blah blah.
vibrant,
Blah blah is good.
inclusive, robust
robust.
economy, welcoming environment. Are these things that capture?
It's got rich history, it honors that, I know folks are interested in that, and we want to make sure that people, yeah, I think all those, I think it says the same thing, both sides.
It's different, yeah.
Same
It's
lines,
different,
the
yeah.
same thing.
But the blah blah, I think everyone here is good with the
Blah, blah.
blah blah.
Sorry, I don't mean to minimize it, but it's just sort of what we call it internally. So if, I actually like Marty's suggested wording for where people put down roots, start and grow their businesses. I like that better than build businesses and raise their families. I like the possessive there. So if I push these together, and are people content with this being the vision that drives your next budget?
Yeah, I'd say yes.
Thumbs
Okay.
up, thumbs down, side.
Okay,
Thumbs
so
up.
I'll do a bit of wordsmithing on the blah blah and get it back to you. So goals.
We didn't know we had to work today.
Yeah, I don't say anything.
So, goals. What it seemed to me as a result of reviewing the notes from the meeting, so I went through and took Emily's sheet that looked sort of like this, only much bigger. So Emily did a bunch of that, and you'll see there's red marks all over it. Every time I captured a comment, I put an X through it so that I knew that I'd caught them all. So where we are here is the first column is the original goal from last year. So I'm now looking at this. It's the goal table that's in your packet. The second column is comments that all of you made. And the third column is whether I interpret additional discussion to be required on the basis of the input that you provided or not. So the two that there's actually three that my interpretation of your input resulted in my determining that they needed more discussion. One was fiscal sustainability. The second was public safety, and that's already come up here tonight. And then the other one was general suggestions and comments. So the first question for you all would be, is for the ones that in looking at your comments, felt that no further discussion was required, was goal 1, increasing revenue, goal 2, expanding economic development opportunities, and goal 3, improving infrastructure. There was not a lot in what I reported back that made me feel that those needed to be fundamentally changed or discussed. So fiscal sustainability and public safety were the ones that we may want to focus in on today, given the feedback we've already gotten on the issue of public safety, which at this point includes police, fire, public works / code enforcement. So for the fiscal sustainability, the primary reason why I said that this needed discussion is the comment of considering merging increasing revenue and fiscal sustainability into a reworded single goal. So that revenue, which in some ways is a subset of fiscal sustainability. So I'm not vested in the verbiage, but it was clear that at the meeting, the thought was increasing revenue and fiscal sustainability were more of a fit than a separate.
Before you move forward, is that okay with everyone to joining 1 and 4? Any? Yeah, okay.
Okay. So I'll come back. I'll work with Marty directly, and we'll come back to you with a single goal that covers both concepts. For public safety, the reason why that one came back as needing more discussion is that Chris's input around sort of this single statistic of reduce overall crime by 5% didn't really allow for the nuance or the reality of Chris's world, and actually Ron's either, probably where there's a correlation, and now that we've added fire. So, what the measurement parameters are, how to add fire and flooding, which was the other one that I forgot as a public safety, flooding, which takes in fire and police and everybody, but it's a concept as well. So this is the one that I don't have myself specific suggestions as much as a process suggestion, which is perhaps that I work directly with the public safety folks to get your feedback on what really is a reasonable set of objectives for you to have, knowing that the goal is to enhance, increase, ensure. I think that's the other thing that's missing here, is the action word. So
let me, so I had an opportunity to read a couple chapters of Jane Jacobs. I should have read the entire book, but, her sense of place and having multiple uses of an environment and place does tie to kind of reducing, or improving public. Maybe reducing is such a negative word. Maybe we need to start looking at more positive words and because in our envision, if we divide that statement into three of things that we envision for the city, one relates to the economy, the other one is welcoming environment, and the other one strong sense of place that honors its rich history. And maybe that those three are the kind of the main buckets that all these goals should be in there, if that's what we envision. And the public safety, the way it's worded, doesn't really fit in any of those, so maybe working through that, where's it fit when welcoming the environment or working on the economy and making it a robust economy? So I think it fits in all those things, but maybe it's just a language thing.
Okay, and does it feel right to work with Chris and Ron directly?
Well, I
and
think like
Public Works and
even,
Jim?
community development, I think it's important because community development does, in my mind, depending on the curb appeal, on the way you build your parks, code enforcement, I think all those things do add
Okay.
to, in my mind, public safety.
So what do you think if we take this one back at a staff level and come back to you with a proposal for the public safety goal? Does that seem,
I think so.
Yeah, right.
okay.
Could you just put an asterisk there and drop it down and explain what it is? And go through going.
Yeah, well, it should be self-explanatory if it's a
Yeah, but it
goal.
isn't. That's the
And
problem.
so that's what I'm saying, is we'll come back to you with a goal statement as well as what the objectives would be. Okay. So for this general suggestions and comments, these, I think, are more action-oriented, so to me, they fall more in the category of potential objectives than they do the category of new goals. So as we come back to you with measurable objectives for each of these goals, my sense is the majority of these general suggestions would find their way in. So, what do you think?
Again, somehow add some of the plans that we've worked on in the past. We have
Okay.
the bounce back, but we also have, we talk about the parks and open space master plan, but we also
Right.
have a housing element that we worked on, and we also have a bike and ped master plan that has multiple things that I think could participate in this,
Okay.
or should participate, since we put the effort into
Yeah.
putting a plan together.
Yeah, it's a good suggestion. So, where we at? We good?
I think.
With next steps, so to me, the next steps are, we will come back to you with a revised vision statement. We will come back to you with reworked goal statements. For those that we talked about briefly this evening, I'll meet with staff to revise the public safety one. We will come back to you with a revised criteria, and we will also come back to you with a first run through of what happens to these projects when you run them through the criteria. So we'll use ourselves as guinea pigs and see what happens here, and then refine it and come back with suggestions. So,
Perfect.
good?
Thank you so much.
Yes, so we even got it done 10 minutes early.
See you tomorrow morning at 9.
Okay, so Marty, you and I will work out how we bring this back. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kitty.
You're staying for later, right? Oh, okay, good. So for the public is here for the regular meeting, if you give us, how many minutes? Are we okay to start the regular meeting, folks? How's the council feel? Okay, we're gonna change, the recording system and then we can get going.
5 minutes?
Yeah, the most. Don't go anywhere, folks.